the one that's going to get it done.
So is it 250,000? Is it 500,000?
It's
for $1 million cool dollars. Can I get the gift back on stage?
Well, with the U.S. dollar right now, is that even going to be worth anything?
No, that's before taxes.
Yeah, but
is there a number like that you would say? You know what? I will actually entertain you for that number.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a number. I mean, but they have to come up with what makes sense. I don't need to.
What makes sense to you?
I'm not going to sing for my supper at this point. And that's not arrogant. That's just the same thing. Like when you're at, we would have to have a meeting of the minds and actually figure out like, hey, how would this make sense for you guys? If I said, hey, $1 million, they're going to say, well, why? We don't really need you.
All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. I've got a couple of interesting stories for you guys today. The first story that I want to talk about today, a recent physique update from none other than Nathan Asha at 299 pounds. This is the first time we've really seen a complete, comprehensive physique update from Nathan since his hiatus. We have not seen him on a competitive bodybuilding stage since 2021, specifically the 2021 Arnold Classic UK, which he won after a 3-show winning streak. He had a very dominant year that year. But that Arnold Classic UK victory in 2021 qualified him for the 2022 Mr. Olympia, which he then would have had an entire year pretty much to prepare for. And he ended up withdrawing from the Mr. Olympia just a couple months from the show. Now, in that time period, we also saw him part ways with his sponsor, Hostile Nutrition and Fouad Abiad. But with this update, we can see that he's clearly not done with bodybuilding despite that hiatus. He's still carrying quite a bit of size at 299 pounds. Now, I've got to say, I was reading the comment section on this video, and I think the comments towards Nathan were actually pretty harsh. People saying he's out of shape, people saying he's fat, people saying he doesn't look good. And I think we've got to be a little bit more fair to Nathan here because A, he hasn't competed in almost 2 years. It's 2023 now. We haven't seen him on stage since 21. B, he's deep in his offseason. And C, we have no idea what the show he's going to do next is or when it is. So for all we know, he could be a whole year out from his next show. We don't know. So really the main thing that I gleaned from this update is that I think he's still planning on competing because obviously he's carrying a ton of size. And while clearly he doesn't look like the Nathan Asha we're used to seeing on stage, I think we also have to contextualize this update and say, look, he's deep in his offseason. Of course he's not going to look like how he looks on stage. And we also have no idea when he's planning on competing again, if that's even this year. So we can't, it's not like we're looking at his physique update here and saying, well, he's X amount of weeks out from the Olympia, he's looking off. We can't say that because we don't even know what show he's doing. So even though me and Nathan haven't always gotten along, I just wanted to say that I think he's gotten kind of an unfair target on his back with this post. He was getting slammed pretty hard in those comments. And while I agree he's clearly not in shape, we also need to give context to that he's deep in his offseason. And like I said, for all we know, he could be a year from stepping on stage. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below regardless. But I, for one, I am excited to see Nathan Asha eventually step back on stage whenever that might be. Now, next up in the news, I wanted to take a look here at Justin Shier. His latest updates have looked pretty impressive. And we know that he is 15 weeks out, or around 15 weeks out from the Chicago Pro, where he's going to be going head-to-head with the likes of Blessing Awodabu. We really don't know that many guys that are doing that show at this point because it's so far out. But both Blessing and Justin have confirmed that they're doing it. Now, this will be Justin's pro debut. He's working with Matt Jansen, who obviously Matt Jansen has had tremendous success recently with Nick Walker and Sean Clarita. You could put Charles Griffin's name in there as well. And I can really see the potential in Justin's physique. Obviously, 15 weeks out, we can't make much of a judgment call about his conditioning, but he's got a nice structure. He's got a good V-taper. It looks like he can hit somewhat of a vacuum pose. A pretty tight waist for the amount of size that he carries. And I think he has the potential to do some real damage at the Chicago Pro, and enough damage that might surprise people. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Even though we don't have the full lineup, Blessing versus Justin Shier, looking at these updates right now, who would you think would come out on top in that matchup, even though, again, we're very far out from that show? Now, next up in the news, I thought this was very interesting. So Phil Heath recently went on Bob Ciccarello's podcast to discuss a lot of different topics, but one specific topic that caught my interest in this podcast was the Masters Olympia. Obviously, you guys know the Masters Olympia reduced the minimum age requirement to 40 plus, which would then include Phil Heath. He would be eligible to compete in the Masters Olympia, and him and Bob discussed that possibility, and I really actually liked what Phil said here. So I'm going to give a direct quote from Phil here so we don't take it out of context. So in response to this question about whether or not he would do the Masters Olympia, he says, "You know, I was on Jay Cutler's podcast, and I think that's where it started because he was doing this fitness after 50 thing, which God bless him. I mean, that's great for me. Jay said if they paid a certain amount of money, I mean, I understand that part too, but I'll be honest, it's got to be more than just for a 2-day headline for me. And I know how everybody thinks, and I really do," said Heath. He continues, "If I were to do this show, everybody's going to say, why didn't you do the regular Olympia? It just makes sense. You look phenomenal and this and that. I understand these things so well that it doesn't really serve me. I would really have to have a compelling argument because I have to play both sides, right?" Phil continues, "I produce a lot of numbers. I know my worth, and it's worth way more than $100,000. I'm just going to be up front. We're in a sport, in my opinion, where certain personalities, certain athletes bring so much value that there should be something to nudge them. And no different than, hey, we want this UFC fighter, or we want this person to come back from boxing or come from boxing into the UFC or vice versa, and we're willing to pay a fee. And I think that's just business. Unfortunately, that conversation doesn't exist in bodybuilding." He continues, "Oh, there's definitely a number. They have to come up. It would have to make sense. I don't need to. I'm not going to sing for my suffering at this point. We would have to have a meeting of the minds and actually figure out, hey, how this makes sense for you guys. If I say, hey, $1 million, then they're going to say, why? We don't really need you. Then you could say, well, how do we make this happen? There are phone calls that can actually be made to produce." So look, I agree with Phil. I think the prize money at the Masters Olympia, regardless of who shows up to compete, I think $225,000 or whatever, it was somewhere in that realm, split amongst 10 divisions with the top 5 getting paid out in each division. That's split 50 ways. So we still don't know for sure what the top prize money is going to be for first place at the Men's Open Olympia. I guess it wouldn't be called Men's Open. I guess just the Bodybuilding Masters Olympia. But Phil's right. Realistically, the only incentive for someone like Jay or someone like Phil is, like I said, the fans would love it. It would be a huge boost to their social media. It would be a ton of content for them. The fans would absolutely eat it up. But the flip side of that is, as a pro athlete, knowing your worth, I feel like Phil's right. A pro athlete shouldn't have to be responsible for trying to figure out a way to make money or to monetize competing on their own because they're not making enough money through actually competing. So I totally understand Phil's point. Now, I don't necessarily think I agree that he should be paid $1 million to compete. I don't think he's necessarily saying that either in this quote. It's just kind of a number he threw out. Because look, let's be honest, the Open Olympia isn't even $1 million. It's like $400,000 for first place, that is. But here's the thing. This is kind of a unique situation with the Masters Olympia, and it's very similar to the Arnold Classic Ohio in the sense that it's an invitational. They invite who they want to compete at this show. They pick the competitors. There's no qualifying. So I think really the conversation to be had in a situation like this is not necessarily the prize money, but I do think it would be fair to say for an invitational show, if the promoters of the Masters Olympia were to say, hey, we want to pay Phil $250,000 just to show up and compete, I think that should be a conversation that's allowed to happen. And I don't know that it necessarily isn't allowed to happen. They could have a conversation of how can we make this work as far as using Phil, using his image to market the show and try to make that money back in the build-up. And on the flip side of that, it's like, then why don't you just raise the prize money instead of just giving it to one person and entice everybody? Now, I don't think that type of discussion should be happening at shows that are not invitational, but with invitational specifically, they're shows where they're picking their roster already. They're picking what they want their lineup to be already. So, you know, adding money into the conversation if they want a Jay Cutler or a Phil Heath is not that far-fetched. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad there is a Masters Olympia at all for us to enjoy and watch and speculate on. But I do think if they really want this to be a top caliber lineup, they've got to up the prize money. Phil is right. He is worth more than, you know, he's worth more than $229,000. And again, that's split between 10 divisions. Really, with this amount of prize money, it sucks to say this, but it's kind of true. You're really only going to be enticing probably B-list bodybuilders at best. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think in the comment section below. What do you think the prize money should be at the Masters Mr. Olympia? Do you think there should be an opportunity for, hey, let's pay this guy X amount of money just to show up? Should that exist? Could that exist? Could that work? Why or why not? And what do you think about prize money in professional bodybuilding in general? I think about this all the time. the fact that there are some shows where the winner gets $10,000, and in a lot of cases, the bodybuilder that wins that show, that's the only show they win that year. That's the biggest prize purse that they win that year. And the onus is really on them to go promote themselves on social media or whatever and make their own money through sponsorships, ad revenue during the rest of the year. But as a professional bodybuilder, they might only make $10,000 from successfully doing their job, prepping for a show and winning a show. Then they might show up at the Olympia, place outside of the top 10 and not even get paid. Because honestly, guys, some of the bigger names, let's not say the biggest names, but some of the bigger names in bodybuilding, their supplement company sponsorship is probably around $5,000 a month. Making six figures as an IFBB pro through sponsorships is really a rarity. I would say it's probably few and far between that actually achieve that status. So keep that in mind when you're having the discussion in the comments below, that really professional bodybuilding is probably one of the lower paid professional sports that exists. In fact, they pay to maintain pro status. There's a yearly fee associated with an IFBB Pro card. So I know that was a bit of a lengthy discussion, but I do sincerely think it's a genuinely interesting conversation. All right, so moving on, next up in the news, another physique update from Larry Wheels, also featuring Sarah Safari, posting a vacuum pose, then a front double bicep with a vacuum. And I got to say, Larry Wheels, the more this classic physique conversation continues with Larry and the more updates that he posts of his actual physique, the more dialed in I feel he's getting. He looks like right now he is getting actually pretty close to competing. I thought it might be something that could be like a year away, but he looks more depleted. He looks leaner. Even though his legs are a little bit undersized, I feel like you're starting to see more cuts and more definition, more separation in his quads. His waist looks like it's getting smaller. And I got to say, I'm honestly impressed with how he's looking. Again, I think the main thing is the legs. Obviously, I mean, there's no secret about that. Anybody looking at Larry Wheels' physique can make that judgment on their own that they are undersized. But we're not talking about Larry Wheels on the Mr. Olympia stage. We're not even talking about Larry Wheels yet competing as a pro or even really earning a pro card. We're talking about Larry Wheels still just competing in an NPC show because that's all he can do right now. He is an amateur. And I think Larry Wheels, as his physique sits right now, even with the legs, is good enough to win a local classic physique show or to get himself nationally qualified in classic physique. I do think he would have to bring up the legs to be able to win a national level show or a pro qualifier. But I think as his physique sits now, I do think he could get to a pro qualifier or a national show, which you have to qualify for. But I've said it before, I'll say it again, I do think Larry Wheels' physique is better suited for classic physique than it is for bodybuilding. So I think he will do better here than he did when he was competing in bodybuilding as an amateur. As long as he doesn't have any issues making weight. I don't know what his exact height is, so I don't know exactly what his weight cap would be. Now, the final story that I have for you guys today, an off-season physique update from Derek Lunsford. I got to tell you guys, I got an opportunity to hang out with Derek for a little bit at the Arnold Classic, him and Hani Rambod, and he posed for Hani in the hotel room while I was in there. And I got to say, this guy is the real deal. He's a lot bigger in person than you would expect him to be, given the fact that he comes over from 212, given the fact that he's a shorter guy. He's big. And I'm curious to see how he looks in this guest posing in just a few weeks at the Pittsburgh Pro, because in this physique update, he looks really good. And I'm curious to see now with a whole year, well, now it'll be like a year and a half, to prep for this year's Olympia, knowing now that he's an open guy, because it seems like last year for like half the year, him and Hani didn't know whether or not to go 212 or open, but now they have a whole year knowing what the game plan is, knowing he needs to grow into that division, knowing what improvements to make. I think he's going to be really dangerous. You could almost argue that it was a last-minute decision for Derek to do open, and he still became runner-up at the Open Olympia. That's how impressive this guy is. He skipped the Arnold Classic. We know now the reason for that is to make improvements between now and then. And he doesn't want the Arnold Classic, or he didn't want the Arnold Classic to derail him from any possible Olympia progress. I think he's going to be very, very dangerous, and I think he's going to be significantly better at this year's Olympia than he was last year. But that's going to wrap it up for the video, guys. I hope you did, in fact, enjoy it. Make sure you leave a like, a big thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Subscribe if you have not subscribed already. That helps out a lot. And as always, I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power signing out. All right, guys, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy the content. Also, check out my Instagram at Nick Strength Power. my Facebook page, which is simply Nick Strength and Power, my secondary YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Vlogs, for vlogs and bonus content that you will not see on this channel, and consider subscribing to my third YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Pokemon, which is all things Pokemon and trading card games, completely unrelated to this channel. So if you're into that, give that one a look, and all links to merchandise and social media will be in the description box below. If you guys want a Nick Strength and Power t-shirt, that will be in the Shopify link below. Have a great day.